Okay. Uh, okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, or as Milton Berle used to say, ladies and germs. Uh, okay. So, sporting fans, I know everybody is taking a great sacrifice. They could be home or at their favorite brew pub in Boulder watching the Broncos and the 49ers. I got my cell phone, so we'll get reports throughout the evening. All right, actually, I've turned off my cell phone. Okay. I only use it to call the minister during his sermon. But I'm Henry Kroll, and I'm the chair of the Forum Committee, which is part of our Social Justice Council at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. And we call this the Public Forum. We started calling it the Sunday Forum, the UUCB Forum. You know, nobody knows what UUCB is except people that are already in this building. So we're calling it the Public Forum, and we have one of the great residents of Boulder and a great friend of the Forum here to open our season. We meet Sundays typically because there's little else going on in Boulder. That's what we think, but there's always something that develops on Sunday around 7 o'clock. So we escaped the real conflict because my San Francisco Giants were going to be in the pivotal final game of the playoffs while we were speaking, and they already made it, so I could relax. There's a wonderful book I recommend called How Life Imitates the World Series. It's true, isn't it, David? He calls me Hammer and Hank. And my sister began her career in journalism at the age of 13 by interviewing Jackie Robinson. Yeah, and so anyway, we have a distinguished journalist with us. Let me just recap what we're going to do. The forum program has the following format. We're going to introduce David. We're going to make a couple of announcements first. If you're new to the building, the bathrooms, there's a men and ladies room that adjoin the foyer when we come in here. We call that the Sky Room, where David's going to have books and tapes set up for sales and signatures. We have some other informational booths about public media, public radio, Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice materials as well. And so we'll start the program at about 7:15 in about 5 minutes, and then go for, about 45 minutes, David? Whatever he feels is right. Then we'll do a stretch and begin a question and answer, a period of dialogue with David, and I'll go around. The reason I'm holding this, a handheld mic, and I'll hand you the mic, and you'll have some, we're taping this, so you could get a DVD, as a matter of fact, for a nominal $5, or we can maybe make it free tonight because there's so many of us. So we'll have we'll go till about 8:30 with the Q&A. If it gets prolonged, that's okay too. But we want to have about a half an hour for the refreshments and reception and the time to dialogue. And because what we want to do with these forums is not just yak at you or yak amongst ourselves, but to engage. So at the end of the evening, you might have some ideas about the topic, what's to be done. So it's going to be up to us, I think, to help put this planet on a better path. So we have some announcements first. What I wanted to tell you a little bit about David is that, among other things, if I could find my crib sheet here. David, I guess we all know David, otherwise we wouldn't be in this room tonight. He's one of America's tireless and wide-ranging investigative journalist. David has actually altered the independent media landscape. I first met him about 25, 30 years ago. He was roaming California. If I'd be in San Francisco, he'd pop up and talk at the UU Church or the Berkeley Event Center. Then I'd go down to Southern California. He'd be talking at Caltech. You never know. And where else did I see you? In Seattle. I mean, there's no getting away from David Barsamian. And he's either talking to people like us in this room that are going to make the change, or he's talking to people like Noam Chomsky, the late Howard Zinn, Tariq Lee, Richard Wolff, Arundhati Roy, and also the late Edward Said. He's the winner of the Media Education Award, which I support. I'm a board member of Action Coalition for Media Education. He's also won the ACLU's Upton Sinclair Award, and he's about to receive the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center Lifetime Achievement Award on November 15th. So I want to get Carolyn Bernitsky up here from the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice. Tell us the details of that event and any other events that are coming up. So then we'll turn it over to David.
Thank you. I promise I'll be real quick. First, I just want to say, David, that I'm a huge admirer of yours, and I just think you've done amazing things. And so the Peace Center is really honored to give you a Lifetime Achievement Award this year. Again, it's November 15th at the Unity Church from 5 to 9. It's a Saturday night, so we invite you to come and celebrate that with us. You can find out more about that from our website. Just a couple of other quick announcements is that we've been really pressing hard on Jared Polis to come out against Fast Track for these terrible trade agreements. This one is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're having a demonstration on Friday, November 7th at noon. I have a flyer, which I'll hand out afterwards if anyone would like to have one. We're having weekly demonstrations against U.S. attacks in Iraq and Syria again on Saturdays at 11 o'clock at the corner of Canyon and Broadway. And the last thing I just wanted to say is I'm collecting signatures for a ballot initiative for home rule for Boulder County. So if anyone hasn't signed that and you'd like to, you can talk to me afterwards. And David, I'm looking to you for answers. What do we do? Thank you, David, for doing what you do.
So November 15th, Rocky Mountain Peace Annual Peacemakers Award, and that's going to start at 5, and it goes to 9 o'clock p.m. at the Unity Church at Valmont and Glenwood? Folsom. Okay. And there's a charge. They'd like to do this as a fundraiser, so bring your checkbook and wallet. There's a silent auction and other fundraising opportunities, but if somebody is out of funds, they're welcome as well. Am I correct? Okay. They're setting up at 5, and then they'll have a reception and a dinner and potluck and with all good food, I'm sure. It goes to 9 o'clock. And we'll go to about 9 o'clock tonight. What else could I say about David or other announcements? I wanted to say, first of all, there's one of his staff members. Does anybody know Gavin Dahl? And he's written a cover story in the current issue of the Boulder Weekly. That's a subject close to my heart and David's, because it has to do with communications. How are we going to get the story out? The things that we need to understand in the world. In one way, more important than ever, is through the internet. And Boulder has an initiative on the ballot, 2C, the digit 2 and the letter C, to authorize Boulder to look into a municipal internet communication service, which is already becoming operational in Longmont. So even the business community here in Boulder's totally in favor of this, because Boulder business will take it hard when the companies start moving to Longmont, because they have the state-of-the-art gigabytes and all the things that fiber optics can do. So read the Boulder Weekly and decide. So when I'm looking at David's website, and I'll call him up here in a minute, I have to show you on his website. Have you seen these postage stamps from countries around the world? They're not really postage stamps. They're just little pictures of everybody that David's ever met and interviewed, like Howard Zinn, Arundhati Roy, Noam Chomsky, Tariq Ali, among others. How long have you been doing alternative radio? I think it's 28 years now, 1986. It's now heard in 175 radio stations, what are called largely community public radio stations, and it also goes around the world through the internet, of course. So, David, you got everybody poised? I know you want to get their names on this thing. Do you want me to circulate this or start this going? This is for alternative radio, and if you want information on the forum, we'll write it down as well. I should announce what we're going to do on the next forum is going to be just 4 weeks from today on November 16th, and we're inviting Michael Litwin, the journalist who formerly with the Rocky Mountain News and now with the Colorado Independent, to do a recap of what's just occurred in the elections in Colorado and across the country. So that's November 16th. So David, you got the floor, and they're eager to hear.
Well, thank you, Henry, and those of you who are eager to hear, thanks so much for coming out on this Sunday evening. It's good to see all your smiling faces. Some comrades from Fort Collins are here. Other familiar faces from the Peace and Justice Movement in Boulder are here. I feel I don't have that much I can talk to you about or instruct you, but I'll give you a few things that I'm thinking about. And originally this was billed as a annual State of the World address with the caption of what is to be done. This was, of course, a famous question and book posed by Comrade Lenin over almost 100 years ago. Not John Lennon, but the other one. And indeed, it's a very difficult question to pose, and what I want to do with you, for you, this evening is give you some historical grounding, particularly in terms of what's happening in the Middle East, because in a vacuum of information, we're all subject to all kinds of fantasies and concocted stories and fabrications and inventions. And history and knowledge of history is very important. And you must know the Spanish 19th century philosopher George Santayana, who said those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think there is no part of the world where that repetition occurs with such intensity as in West Asia, as in the Middle East. But according to our great liberal Secretary of State, John Kerry, who won the hearts of many anti-Vietnam War resistors in the late 1960s and early 1970s, what is happening today in Syria and Iraq, I'm quoting here, has absolutely nothing to do with U.S. policy in the region. Now, the level of cynicism here is simply breathtaking. I mean, he and Obama, must think that we're blithering idiots who literally know nothing about U.S. involvement in the region. You know, it starts with the get-go of 1945, the year I was born, when the U.S. really takes over the imperial reins of the region from the British and the French. The British get partially marginalized. They were to be totally pushed out by 1953 with the CIA coup, which destroyed democracy in Iran, and then with the ill-fated invasion of Suez in 1956. So by 1956-57, the British have been largely sidelined, and the region has become a kind of U.S. fiefdom. But let's go back a little bit to give you some of that historical background. What happens at the end of World War I when boundaries, the imperial cartographers come out of the closet in Paris and in London and start drawing lines on the map, creating countries whole cloth where no countries existed, such as Jordan, such as Kuwait. And so you had this border drawings, which allowed the British to get most of the oil, and the French, as a consolation prize, they got Lebanon and Syria with very little oil. The U.S., of course, had its eyes on Saudi Arabia, with which it entered into a Faustian bargain in 1945, and that bargain continues to this very moment. I mean, the very country that has funded the jihad, as no other country has, Saudi Arabia, is virtually immune from any kind of scrutiny, certainly in the corporate-controlled media here in the United States, and the political class, be they Republicans or Democrats, also give them a free ride. So these countries are carved up out of the remains of the Ottoman Empire in 1919, 1920, 1921. The rawest of deals were handed out to two communities, well, maybe even three communities if one were to consider the Balfour Declaration, where the British signed over land that they didn't own or control to someone else who wanted to live on that land, completely ignoring the wishes of the indigenous population. That's the Balfour Declaration, November 2nd, 1917. I always remember that date, not because I have such a good memory, but it was Edward Said's birthday. And he would always, mourn that day. It was always a celebration, but not really a celebration. But a year before the Balfour Declaration, two diplomats, Pico, sorry. That's good. That's a good slip. Yeah, the Sykes-Picot Treaty. Mark Sykes is a British diplomat, high-ranking. François Picot is a high-ranking French diplomat. They decide to carve up what they anticipated to be the rich bounty of the Ottoman lands. They were anticipating that they would win World War I, the Ottoman Empire would collapse, and they would move in and take those lands. Now, there was a slight little problem here, and that was the British, at the time they were signing the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which would guarantee them control of much of the Middle East, they were also promising the Arabs in the Hijaz, in the Nefud areas, what is now Saudi Arabia, independence if they joined the fight against the British. This was touched upon in Lawrence of Arabia in a very tangential way. I don't recommend that you see that film to learn about the history of the Middle East. But nevertheless, Claude Rains plays a very crafty and wily and cunning British diplomat who has concocted this deal that they're going to give the Arabs independence if they fight with the British against the Turks, at the same time knowing full well that they had no intention to do that, that they were going to take the lands for themselves. And in fact, that's what happened at the end of the war. It was one of the great double crosses of history. But a couple of communities really got the short end of the stick in 1920, 1921. The Armenians, who were eastern Anatolia and who were largely displaced in a systematic genocide that began in 1915, they were promised an independent homeland in the Treaty of Sèvres in France in 1920. Also promised an independent homeland were the much larger Kurdish community, which straddles what are now 4 countries, but in fact were more like a homogeneous cultural unit. Kurds in Iran, Kurds in Turkey, Kurds in Syria, and Kurds in Iraq. So there was going to be an independent Kurdistan as well as an independent Armenia. But all of that stuff, of course, was flushed away, and a new treaty, a new double cross came about in 1923 with the Treaty of Lausanne, which negated all of the promises made in 1920, negated Woodrow Wilson's promises to the Armenians, to the Kurds, to other colonized or dominated people. So the Kurds, to bring a complex story, I hope in a compact way, they form the largest nation that does not have a nation. About 25 to 30 million Kurds in those 4 countries that I named, the largest being in Turkey. Now, of course, Turkey is a close U.S. ally, member of NATO, and just the other day bombed Kurdish areas inside its own territory. It so far has refused to join the fight against ISIS, but it has a lot of energy and a lot of ability to attack its own population in Anatolia. And this has been an ongoing human rights catastrophe that the corporate control media in this country have done a splendid job in covering. That is to say, not at all. Very little information about the Kurdish question, the 4,000 villages that were razed to the ground, 40,000 Kurds were killed. Imagine if Iran did this, or North Korea, or some other designated enemy that Washington did not like. What the uproar would be here, what the virtuous rhetoric would be about how terrible those regimes are. They're inhumane, they're barbaric. And indeed, they are. But you know, there was a lot of attention paid to the beheading of the 2 journalists, the 2 American journalists, right? I don't have to tell you about that. Jim Foley and Steve Sotloff. We were told over and over again their biographies, interviews with their parents, schoolmates. You know, we learned every detail in their lives, and also a French traveler in Algeria was killed and another one was beheaded. But there is a sense in that actually Chomsky and Herman created in Manufacturing Consent of worthy and unworthy victims. So these victims were worthy. They are worthy of our full attention, as is Malala Yousafzai, the young woman from northwestern Pakistan, from the Swat Valley, who was challenging the Taliban for education for girls. She recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. She met with President Obama in the White House. She is a worthy victim because the Taliban is a formation that is unworthy, that is a designated enemy. And so her plight, which is indeed sad, is amplified, whereas the plight of Nabila Rehman, also a young Pakistani teenager, goes totally unnoticed. Why? Because her family was killed by American bombs. And that's not a story that we want to hear about here in the United States. So worthy and unworthy victims, whenever you see the corporate media, you know, focusing, and even some of the alternative media fall for this line of, well, isn't she like this and like that. Now, there was a couple of things I want to tell you about Malala Yousafzai. When she was with Obama, she told him that the drone strikes were counterproductive in Pakistan and were producing more terrorists. In almost all of the news reports of their meeting, that was not mentioned. What was mentioned, of course, was the Taliban is horrible. Girls should be educated in Pakistan. They should have equal opportunity as boys, and those kinds of things. But this crucial fact did not coincide with the, what was needed in terms of the propaganda system. Now, I uncovered another little quote from Malala, which didn't show up in any of the articles and TV and radio coverage after she won the Nobel Peace Prize. She said, "I am a socialist." She said, "The only way we're going to solve the problems facing Pakistan and the world is through collective action. And socialism is the answer." Let me see by a show of hands how many of you heard that. A few people did. Good. Most of you did not. So the press, of course, they practice prostitution. This is a rare, art form. They're prostitutes. They compete for the best hair on the air. Recently, just to talk about the media a little bit, because I think the media are so central in forming ideas that people have and shape opinions. There's a new host, or you may not know, of Meet the Press. His name is Chuck Todd. He replaced David Gregory, who replaced the sainted Tim Russert, who died, I think, in 2007 or 2008. And there's there's an article on the new host of Meet the Press, this very prestigious Sunday morning news program. And what do we learn in this article about Chuck Todd? He's gotten a tan, he's lost weight, and he has facial hair. Presumably, all of these factors will help in making him a better journalist. In fact, the article, which interestingly appears in the arts page, not in the political section of the newspaper, but the arts page, also mentions that he really challenged Obama on a particular question. But if you read the text of his interview with Obama, it was barely any kind of challenge, because Obama had embedded all of the assumptions, and Todd, just like the other journalists, then are left to talk with tactics. Okay, so you're going to bomb Syria, fine. You're going to go after ISIS, fine. How are you going to do it? Are you going to use B-52s? Are you going to use land-based airplanes? Are you going to use the Turkish Air Force base in Incirlik? Are you going to use aircraft carriers? It's all about tactics. It's never about unearthing or interrogating the embedded assumptions. And that's what we've got to do, and they simply don't do it. Then, Anderson Cooper, 360 on CNN, he had a recent program featuring Jay Carney. He's a former White House press secretary, now CNN commentator, Jim Sciutto, CNN national security correspondent, and Eli Lake from the Daily Beast, all incidentally white males. I guess there's not enough white male representation in the media or the power structure, so they made sure that they were trying to balance that imbalance. And so the banner that was scrolling across the TV screen, should U.S. have kept troops in Iraq? And then with a question mark, and then ISIS warnings missed, also a question mark. And then there was a discussion about ISIS, where did it come from, what are its origins. This was just a day or two after the Khorasan group completely disappeared from media coverage. Do you remember that on the 24th, 25th, and 26th of September? We were under imminent attack, and that's why we had to bomb Syria. I mean, again, this is really stretching credulity. First of all, as our Iranian brother here can attest, a Salafi or a Wahhabi, this is the Islamic fundamentalist group, would never take the name Khorasan, because Khorasan is a province in northeastern Iran, which is very sacred to Shias because it has one of the most important shrines in all of Shia Islam. So it just demonstrates the incredible ignorance of the intelligence agencies that they would ascribe to apparently a handful of people this name of Khorasan. Now, of course, it's conveniently disappeared. Has anyone heard anything about Khorasan since that, fever pitch of media attention? No, it served its purpose. It allows for bombing Syria because they were going to attack us. And then, of course, not only John Kerry gives me infinite amount of materials to talk about, but so does the 44th president, the constitutional lawyer, Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama, who told Steve Kroft on 60 Minutes, "America leads. We are the indispensable nation. Our military is the best in the history of the world." And Kroft doesn't bat an eyelash. He lets Obama get away with these preposterous assumptions, although I must say Obama did not originally create this indispensable nation trope. That credit goes to Madeleine Albright, who in 1995 said, "We are the indispensable nation." And then someone asked her, "Well, what do you mean by that?" We see farther into the future. This is the first time, as far as I know, in the history of politics or the world that political leaders or administration officials ascribe to themselves the power of clairvoyance. Apparently, they can see farther in the world. Although, it's really interesting, they really can't see. Even though we pay through the nose for these 17 intelligence agencies, over $100 billion, they cannot see the Soviet Union collapsing. They cannot see the attacks on 9/11 coming. They cannot see the Shah of Iran falling. A year after Carter praised the Shah as an island of stability in the Middle East and a great friend of America. I mean, it's truly astonishing how little we get for the billions that are spent and how much credit they heap upon themselves as to how brilliant they are and how far they could see into the future. They didn't see ISIS coming. Where did ISIS come? This is the ISIS, Islamia Dola fi Iraq wa Sham, the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham. Sham is the old Arab name for Palestine and Syria. It's always historically been called Asham. And even Damascus, one of the oldest inhabited cities in the history of the world, is also called Asham. So where did ISIS, where did it suddenly come from? And why didn't our intelligence agencies alert us to it? Well, there is a Turkish newspaper called Radikal, where I first learned from Graham Fuller, who is a former CIA agent, that in fact ISIS is built, not say directly, but indirectly, forms itself because of US interventions in the Middle East. The literal interventions, the bombings, the diplomatic, military, economic support for Israeli colonial policies in the West Bank, attacks on Gaza, attacks on Lebanon, bombings of Tunisia, Somalia, Yemen, etc. All of these things were apparently missed by the so-called intelligence agencies. They could also not see the fall of the deeply unpopular Hosni Mubarak regime in Egypt, a regime that the United States backed to the hilt until the very last days. And now, the latest pharaoh in Egypt is Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. He orchestrated a coup, toppling a democratically elected government of Mohamed Morsi in July of 2013, and the US refused to call it a coup. Rather, it lauded the action as restoring democracy. Now, here you really have to get into fine nuances of the lexicon, of vocabulary here. A military coup destroying democracy is restoring democracy. Okay. This is Orwell's doublethink. right? The ability to hold in your mind simultaneously two contradictory ideas and not feel any contradiction. Well, it's perfectly normal. We're restoring democracy. And
Giant shrimp.
sorry,
Giant shrimp.
giant shrimp.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of that. Oxymoron.
Yes, indeed, an oxymoron. And Sisi recently got 97% of the vote in a rigged election, Soviet style. I wonder where the 3% came from. And Kerry called the election historic and pledges to supply more Apache helicopters for the very hungry and desperate Egyptian people, of whom tens of thousands are being held as political prisoners. Many thousands have been killed, and many more have been wounded, tortured, etc. In other words, it's a great foreign policy success story for Washington, because the main thing they want out of Egypt is for them to remain in the US orbit, in particular, as long as it keeps the pressure on Gaza. This is part of why Egypt gets $2 to $3 billion a year, mostly in weapons, is to keep the Palestinians properly locked up in their cages in the largest open-air prison in the world, in the Gaza Strip. Yet the State Department says our policy is based on national security interests. That's another kind of Saturday Night Live joke, because the actual policies are endangering the U.S. More and more, and are certainly having a lethal effect on the peoples of those countries that we continue to bomb. But again, let me try and weave in a little history again. The Kurds were persuaded, Henry Kissinger, who was Nixon's national security advisor in 1972, I think it was, in May of 72, he was getting closer and closer to the Shah. The Shah is now, firmly entrenched in the U.S. webs of alliances. And the Shah wanted to start an Kurdish insurrection against Saddam Hussein, because there was some territorial dispute with Saddam, who was by then ruling Iraq. And arms, money goes pouring into Iran to be channeled to the Kurds, to the Iranian Kurds and Iraqi Kurds fighting Saddam Hussein. In fact, the Kurdish leader, still the leader of the Kurds 35 years later, Mustafa Barzani, when Kissinger got married, gave him a rug. He gave him 3 rugs and a gold and pearl necklace as gifts. And the uprising lasted for about 3 years. And then the arms and supplies to the Kurds were simply cut off. And the Kurds were left hanging, dangling, after being promised all of this support from Washington, because the Shah had made a deal with Saddam Hussein to end their dispute, and the Shah in return called off the insurrection. And so Barzani was, absolutely flabbergasted, and he wrote to Kissinger, "Your Excellency, the United States has a moral and political responsibility to our people." The reply from Washington? Silence. A year later, Kissinger is being questioned during a hearing in Congress, and someone asked, again, another oxymoron, the House Intelligence Committee was asking about, what happened to the Kurds? I thought we were helping them, and then we just dropped them like a hot potato. And that's where Kissinger made his infamous statement, "Covert action should not be confused with missionary work." And indeed, it never has, and it probably never will. Well, the media, continue its societal role of disinforming, inventing, fabricating. That article, by the way, you can find it on the internet from Radical. It's from September 2nd. It's about Graham Fuller, the CIA agent who says that U.S. policy has made it possible for the rise of ISIS. But I think we're going to see many more such jihadi formations because the U.S. shows no intention of changing its policy in the Middle East. So the question that has to come up then is that the region is engulfed in violence. Why? What are the historical factors that shape the current conflicts? And so I think I tried to give you a little bit of background, what happened at the end of World War I with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, then the arrival of the British and the French, then in the end of World War II, the U.S. replaces the British and French as the imperial hegemon of the region. And feudal and repressive regimes are supported. Lip service is given to democracy and liberty and human rights and feminism and women's rights, but in practice, the practice, of course, is quite different. But if you are a designated enemy, then those are all invoked, and there's a lot of breastfeeding that goes on. Now, there's a couple of things I just want to touch on. Palestine, briefly, it's hard to touch on it briefly, but it is an ongoing issue, and the recent slaughter in Gaza, one of many, should not, divert our attention from the ongoing colonization project that is continuing in the West Bank in particular. In fact, a large new settlement, the largest settlement, confiscation of land was just announced, and Netanyahu made a really interesting comment about it, the Israeli prime minister. There was some criticism from the White House that, their little tap on the wrist, this is not helpful to the peace process. But Netanyahu said what the Israelis just did is consistent with American values. And I thought that was a very perhaps interesting and ironic admission that Netanyahu knew something about American values of confiscation and concentration camps and massacres of indigenous populations. Even today, you can see how what is left of the West Bank has made true what Ariel Sharon predicted 20, 30, 40 years ago when he said, we'll make a pastrami sandwich of them, the Palestinians. We'll insert a strip of Jewish settlements in between them, right across the West Bank, so that in 25 years, neither the UN or the US will be able to tear it apart. Now, one of the great things we're supposed to celebrate, of course, is, the Camp David Accord of 78, 79, Jimmy Carter, bringing Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, a known terrorist, to the White House to sign the Camp David Accords. 13, 14 years later, the same kind of thing. It's really interesting how the emperor brings the vassals together. He's in the middle. In this case, it was Clinton, before it was Carter, bringing the two conflicting parties together, embracing them, and the phony handshakes, and then the signing of these treaties. Well, I remember the Camp David, the Oslo Accords, and the Washington ceremony very vividly, because Edward Said called me up almost immediately. He was invited to attend, and he refused to attend. He said, this is not only window dressing, this is not only Hollywood theater, this is a complete sellout of the Palestinians and their rights. Arafat, desperate for power, took this little fig leaf that was offered to him by Clinton, and then, thanked, like a good servant, thanked the master for helping out. Today, the West Bank, because of Oslo, is divided into three parts. One part is under the control of the Palestinian Authority. A second part, that's called Area B, is under Israeli security control, and the third part is under complete Israeli control. So what is left now is indeed strips of land, Bantustans, that are not connected or will not be connected and will not really lead to a lasting peace in the Middle East. One has to ask the question, if that is the case, then is U.S. policy really interested in lasting peace in the Middle East? Or does it see the region as a profitable area, not just for oil and natural gas, but mostly for weapons sales? So the more conflict there is, the more tensions there is, the more wars that are being fought, the better it is for the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower so presciently warned the country about in 1961. The better it is for Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and United Technologies and all of the other so-called defense contractors. Actually, they're war contractors. So as Ralph Bourne, a great pacifist, said during World War I, he said, and he was a conscientious objector. He didn't go to jail as Eugene Debs and others did, but he was a resistor nonetheless. He said, war is the health of the state. And what can we do is to decouple ourselves from the imperial war machine. So when you ask the question, we have to think about a completely different way of doing politics. Because this business of, as usual, of the arsenic and the cyanide, choices that were served up, every November, it's not going to do the trick. We need a new kind of politics, and it's not going to come from above. It has to come from people-driven action. It has to come from small groups that get together and organize and insist that we're going to decouple ourselves from the U.S. military empire, that we're going to decouple ourselves. Why does Obama over and over again make the boast that we have the greatest military in the history of the world? He has completely bought into this paradigm of U.S. dominance, of U.S. being indispensable, and that no other country can do what the U.S. does, so we have to have more and more weapons. I was just in Kansas City last week. A huge new nuclear weapons plant has been opened there. So much for Obama's promise to end nuclear weapons. They're building a new generation of triggers in right outside of Kansas City, and they call it a national security campus. Oh, it's a campus. We learn, we go, we study, we expand our minds. I mean, see how they corrupt the language and really, try and prevent people from understanding what is going on. So, let me get a little bit of water here. How are we doing on time?
Well, David, let's go another 10 minutes and see how it is.
Yeah. Well, I want to say about, this thing about community action and what can be done. I was just in Bozeman, Montana, not exactly Boulder, Colorado. I was stunned to find a thriving food co-op there with 170 employees, a bakery, totally worker-owned and operated and flourishing. And here in Boulder, Colorado, we don't have a food co-op. I mean, I'm just saying, putting this out there as an example. Then I went to Livingston from Bozeman. Bozeman's a huge town, about 40,000. Livingston, Montana, is about 7,000 people. They have 3 independent bookstores, 3 in 7,000. And we couldn't keep our beloved, left hand in operation here in Boulder. So I think, acting locally, what can we do here in our community? It's difficult to change the world, but we can change things here in Boulder County. And I think with this electronic instrument that we have, KGNU, which is one of the best community radio stations in the country, we have an outlet where we can learn things and also where we can express things. And, as I did in 1978, start doing radio, producing programs. We're also blessed to have the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center here, which has been in the forefront of social change and action in our community. And I know we have here a comrade from Netherlands, Colorado. They have a mountain forum there where people gather. there's so much importance and strength in gathering. Not just because, you're here to see me, but that you see you're not alone, that there are other people that are concerned about the issues that concern you. And overcoming that isolation and atomization is a very important cultural thing. Barbara Kingsolver talks about this quite a bit. So does Sandra Steingraber. How, the culture keeps us in front of our tablets, be they iPads or iPhones or iMacs or whatever I is floating in your particular universe, or Androids. We need to connect like that. The eponym to E.M. Foster's Howard's End is only connect. It's so important that we find kindred spirits and do something locally in the community that can have an impact. And so we do have opportunities here to make a change. And it's hard to say what will be that tipping point. You may think, well, I'm going to, I went out to Broadway and Canyon and I stood there and I waved a sign and, a few people honked and somebody spit at me and another person said, yelled some nasty words at me. And then you stop going because it doesn't have an effect. But really, it does have an effect. First of all, you're making a moral statement that you care, that that you care enough to be there, to make that phone call, to visit Polis's office, to visit Michael Bennett's office, to visit Udall's office or Hickenlooper's office, to write letters, to talk to those staff people. All of these things incrementally amount to something. Isolated by themselves, you think, well, what difference does it make? This petition will never get to Udall. It may not get to Utah. Actually, it will get to Utah because that's where the NSA has built a $1.5 billion facility to house all of our communications, emails, text messages, petitions, conversations. It's all there in Utah, so that wasn't completely off. But Senator Udall, he's not going to see it. I think it's very important for we as a community to stand up for what is right. And, while I do criticize Obama vehemently, he does like to quote that saying about the arc of justice is long, but ultimately the arc bends towards justice. Well, that's certainly part of the hope which animates our activities. And I think that in itself is the fulfillment. That's the Dharma. That's the work that we can do here on Earth in this very brief time that we are here. Not only are we, as Carl Sagan called the planet Earth, this pale blue dot in the universe, but we're only here for a couple of days, as they say in Hindi, Char din ki zindagi. There's only 4 days of life, and then we're gone. And so what are we going to do in this period? Are we going to worry about, whether I get the i6 or the i7, or when the i7 comes out, then the i6 will be obsolete, and I got to keep up with my friends, and I got to get an i7? Are we going to get lost in, endless exposés of the Kardashian sisters and their latest divorce or latest, liposuction or whatever operation they're having? Or are we going to try and move this giant boulder, move it a little bit? And we never know when things will change. You often hear the story about Rosa Parks, right? Well, there's a couple of things, maybe, I know this is a very fine-tuned audience. There's a couple of things about Rosa Parks that even Bill Moyers, who's a very admirable journalist, did not know. He repeated this mythology that she had a long day at work, and her feet were tired, and she didn't want to sit down in the back of the bus. Nothing could have been further from the truth. She was a highly trained radical activist. She had gone to the Highland Center in Tennessee to learn about civil disobedience and nonviolence techniques. She was steeped in Gandhian philosophy. She was the general secretary of the NAACP in Montgomery. So, and this was the third or fourth time, and there was another woman who also refused to sit down sometime before, I think months before, that spring, because Rosa Parks, I think, was December 2nd, 1955, or December 1st, one of those two dates. And she got arrested and nothing happened. She served time in jail. It wasn't the moment. It wasn't the spark, that would ignite that movement. And Rosa Parks also failed a couple of times. She got arrested, nothing happened. But on that December day, something happened. So we don't know what it's going to take, in what form it's going to take, how it's going to take. But I think what inspires us is the belief that things can change. Otherwise, why get out of bed in the morning? Why don't we just sit back? We've got our remotes. We've got all our electronic devices. We don't even have to move anymore. We can have pizza delivered. But I think, it's so important that we get involved. And so supporting the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, not just as a member, but with your energy, with your ideas, is a very critical thing. And in Fort Collins, there's also a Peace and Justice Center. Isn't that right? Right. Yeah. So, and we just mentioned Netherlands as well. So I didn't talk about the issue that is dearest to my heart, not just imperialism and corporate capitalism and the corporate media, and that's climate change. And it behooves me to mention it. I do at every single stop. I just came from Helena, Bozeman, and Livingston, Montana. Last week I was in Kansas City. The week before that I was in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and LA. The week before that, Boston, New York. It's been a roller coaster because I've been promoting this new book that I've done with Chomsky, Power Systems. It's our 9th book, and this is the best one so far. I say that not because I have copies here, and I do, but it's rigorously edited. It's just essential Chomsky. And I think you're all interested in him. He's turning 86 years old on December 7th, and we just did a program at MIT at Kresge Auditorium on September 26th, marking the 30th anniversary of our collaboration. So it was a big public event. You can see it. It's on YouTube. It's posted already. It was a great celebration, and I wish you could have been there. And this may break a few of your hearts here in the audience, but don't feel too bad. Noam has just gotten married. Isn't that great? To a linguist from Brazil. I can't tell you more than that. But this is breaking news. So I know that there's a lot of unhappy women around the country who've been holding out hope, but better scratch him off your list. But the climate crisis is the issue overriding everything, and has to be addressed, urgently. I can't say this with more fervor, with more energy. If you've got children or grandchildren, if you care about the future of humanity, you've got to be paying attention to this issue and not falling for these simplistic placebos that are tossed out by corporate capitalism. Drive a Prius, recycle your cardboard and glass and paper, and I do all those things, and compost, but those are not, it's not sufficient. We have to stop pumping fossil fuels into the atmosphere. That's what it is. And so when Obama goes on television and speaks at the UN and at the Congress and is bragging about energy independent America, Saudi America, that we are now have passed Russia in the production of oil and natural gas, he shouldn't be saying any of those things. We should be number one in solar energy, in sustainable energies, not fossil fuel energies. And he's talking about tar sands, which is, if it's released into the atmosphere, and Canada has an even crazier regime that we have in this country under Stephen Harper, who's like George Bush on steroids, a Christian fundamentalist who believes that if God didn't want us to extract those resources, he or she of course said he would not have put them in the ground. So this becomes the raison d'etre for an enormous amount of environmental destruction. I was in Edmonton, Alberta, which is the epicenter of what's happening in northern Alberta, where it's mostly indigenous people who are getting hammered with high cancer rates, with very unusual cancers because of the aquifer being contaminated by all of the drilling and all of the fracking that's going on. Even in eastern Montana, where I just was, and in North Dakota, it's like an unbelievable gold rush there. People making money hand over fist. Who is thinking about Pachamama? Who is thinking about nature? Who is thinking about Matrabhumi? No one. Not the corporations, not the capitalists. They're only thinking about one thing that makes the world go round. This thing. They live and die for this. And all of their advertisements on Charlie Rose and the NewsHour with the different hosts now since Jim Lehrer left, or on All Things Considered or Morning Edition about BP saying how green they are. I see these commercials. I fall out of my seat. I'm saying, are you kidding me? BP is an environmentally conscious corporation. ExxonMobil, which funds a lot of these programs, is an eco-friendly corporation. I mean, we shouldn't laugh, we should weep. ExxonMobil just recorded the largest net profit in the history of capitalism. I know it's a little bit less than your retirement and hedge funds, but nevertheless, $50 billion net. That's what it took home that we know about. Who knows how much money they have secreted away in offshore accounts and other tax loopholes that they're able to exploit, as Apple does, as Amazon does. You know, these are like, by the way, Charlie Rose's favorite guest is Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He treats him like he's, the second coming of Einstein, is this business genius. Who is this business genius that has driven thousands, hundreds of independent bookstores out of business and is now seeking tax-exempt status in other countries where he can locate his offices? His other favorite guests are Henry Kissinger, a certified war criminal, who said, that covert action is not missionary work, and someone who apologizes for war criminals, Thomas Friedman. Check Charlie Rose's records, public broadcasting, right? This is left, liberal, extreme. These are the most frequent guests on the Charlie Rose show. So we have to address this issue, and we have to do it quickly. I mean, I can give you all of this information. For those of you who heard me at the Laughing Goat on September 8th, I went through this in great detail. Some of it is on my website, alternativeradio.org, but getting that information is the first step. Doing something about it is the second step. And finding an organization, finding a community where you can interact and act, where you can, live your ideals is, absolutely crucial. So I'm going to close actually with Barbara Kingsolver, who is a fabulous writer. In fact, we can learn a lot from fiction. We can learn a lot, from Melville's Moby Dick about U.S. imperialism. We can learn about the U.S. wars in Indochina from Graham Greene, a British novelist, and his The Quiet American. We can learn about imperialism in Africa from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And Kingsolver has a new novel out called Flight Behavior, which is about climate change in eastern Kentucky. And she says this. Someone asks her, does it ever become irresponsible or painful to speak of hope? It's never irresponsible to speak of hope, she says. It's irresponsible to give up. We're definitely in for a future none of us banked on. There's no going back to the planet on which human life first evolved. And of course, that's terrible news for us humans. So many extinctions and habitat shifts are already underway. I don't actually feel sure that humanity will be around in 50 or 60 years, but I'm hopeful anyway, not just for the people, but for the gray squirrels and foxes, and oak trees and mockingbirds. It's more a question of what to hope for. It would be foolish to hope that life will stay exactly the same as it is now. We've built ourselves an unsustainable house of cards and moved in. What does a species like that deserve? I'm hopeful that as the cards fall, we will watch and learn. We'll adapt to our altered circumstances and create new ways of being. Humans have done that through the ages, through the ice ages and bronze ages and all the other ages we've been on Earth. Like it or not, it's what we do best. Thank you very much.
Try this. Thank you, Caitlin, and I want to thank everybody who's helped out on the forum series. What the goal of the forum is to do this kind of work, which is, you said, David, is a prerequisite for the next step, which is action. And so this is a prerequisite. That's the purpose of the forum here at the UU Church. So I want to thank Caitlin Moore's doing the sound and the DVDs, and we have other volunteers. I saw them go out to set up their reception. Diane Ewing and the crew. I see Tim Bailey and his wife Susan left. So we have other people, and my wife Jean is one of the greeters. So thanks everybody that makes this possible. We have a little basket out there for donations that help offset the printing costs and publicity and refreshments, so any of that's appreciated. So I want to have everybody else talk. You've given us a lot to think about, David, so hopefully you'll have enough water and we'll have some more dialogue. So I'm coming down to pass the microphone to this gentleman, BJ.
And I'd like to hear your ideas and tell me what you're doing, perhaps to affect positive social change.
David, thank you very much for a thought-provoking talk. I'm going to share one idea that I've been thinking about and actually doing something about it in our own lives. If you think about what David said, there is one issue that unifies all the difficulties we face in America, and that is money. We have a money culture, money consciousness. We want to make money. Corporations want to make money. You want to make money. What we have, once we came to that realization, we said that what we can do is to live in poverty. I'm sort of using that to focus. By that I mean that you pay the minimum tax to Uncle Sam. So what we have done, we talked to our CPA. There is a limit about $18,000, the taxable income. If you're below that, you pay 10%. That's the minimum tax you can pay to Uncle Sam. So each one of us needs to look at your lifestyles and see what can you do to pay less money to Uncle Sam. Don't pay 35% or 25%, but reduce. So if your tax money to Uncle Sam is reduced, that's a message. So they are not going to build $1.5 billion NSF facility in Utah, and so on. And the corporations. So that's a thought that we have been thinking about. We are doing something about it in our own lives. So I wanted to share that with the other thought, but let me stop here.
Thank you.
David, you've blown people away, so I'm looking for signs of movement there, some thoughts. It's going around. Let's see a little hand to eye thing. I see James Duncan coming out of his cave for a question.
I'll open up the questions for tonight. Just maybe a little off the scope here. I was in Denver when the Marvin Booker family received made a little press release about press conference about that $4.6 million judgment. And I know that they were disappointed because none of the sheriffs had been affected. It's not their salaries that money's going to come out of. It's not their jobs that it's going to come out of. And they wanted accountability. And they were gracious about it. They said, "We forgive you. We forgive them for what they did, but they want accountability." I'm just wondering, I don't know the sort of the politics of what's going to happen within the Denver community about how that's going to, the ramifications, to say.
Yeah, I don't really know enough about it. Carolyn, can you talk about it? Does anyone can address this? I've been traveling so much, I'm actually out of touch with what's been happening locally.
Well, it's part of a larger thing that's going on across the country, I think, with the Ferguson, Missouri shooting there and other police brutality, and now it's reached a new crescendo with the militarization of many police departments. Essentially,
yeah, but that's been going on since the Democratic Convention in Denver in 2008, when I saw these guys coming out in armored personnel carriers with helmets, with full body armor, with knee pads, elbow pads, and high velocity machine guns. I said, this isn't Officer Krupke anymore. This isn't your neighborhood cop that you went to school with this kid. This is like a whole different level. And so it started in 2008, and of course it's been continuing ever since, with Homeland Security dispensing the weapons to local police forces. I didn't mention some really good news. I know we're leftists, so we should just be doom and gloom, right? But let's not forget what happened in New York on September 21st, when upwards of 400,000 people marched in the largest demonstration for climate justice. We should insert that word in there. So it was a very important occasion, but I think what happened the next morning was very significant, because that hits the power structure in the way they understand moolah, dough, bread. And that's when the Rockefeller Brothers Fund announced that they were disinvesting from all fossil fuel corporations. Now, this is no ordinary family fund. This is the family of John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, the titan, the captain of industry, who sort of launched this whole petrochemical mania. He was also responsible for the Ludlow massacre, by the way, not too far from here, when he hired Pinkerton thugs to kill immigrant miners. But it was oil that he made his name, his fortune, and so they have disinvested. That can't be missed. On the same day, Stanford University announced it was disinvesting from fossil fuel corporations. Again, don't sneeze at these universities. They have budgets and endowments bigger than most countries in the world. I mean, Harvard's endowment is like $25 billion. It's a budget that exceeds most third world countries. So I don't know about the University of Colorado, but we live here in Boulder, or I don't know about Colorado State University in Fort Collins, or the Front Range Community College, but are they investing in fossil fuels? Maybe we should find out and put pressure on them to disinvest, because that's a concrete thing that we can do.
The other thing that they can do is that they could invest as you disinvest. The thing is, what should be noted, there was a recent settlement
Wind and solar,
with Stanford, because the if you're a nonprofit corporation like Stanford or Yale, University or Harvard, you have to take at least 5% of the billions of dollars that you have in your vaults underneath the campus. You have to invest a minimum of 5% into the work you're supposed to be doing. And Stanford was found in violation of that. And they reached a settlement. So now any student, any person who's a son or daughter of one of their employees, and there's lots of employees on the Stanford campus, gets a full scholarship and other benefits. So they can invest to help the world. So we're not going to just stop at disinvestment. We want to get them investing in the things that are going to put us in the right direction. So Arden has his hand up over there.
Well, responding to the idea that it's pretty hopeless and the little we can do doesn't, really won't accomplish anything. It's good to remember that in trying to nudge that huge boulder, and you're only moving in a tiny bit, that you never know when it's going to reach a tipping point. You never know when it's going to get to the edge of a hill and start rolling down. And that it just takes a lot of concerted effort to do that. And as a matter of fact, it's getting to be clear that I think that more and more people are getting aware and getting concerned, and the empire in many ways is crumbling. And so all we have to do is help that process along.
Yeah, I want to go back to Martin Booker. Amy Goodman was in Denver, broadcasting from Denver last week, I believe. And she had an interview with a journalist and a clergy person who was an advocate for Booker. And what came out of this, that this gentleman, Martin Booker, he wasn't just a homeless person, as the police and the media tried to portray him. He was a homeless advocate. He was from a well-known family in Memphis, and he was homeless intentionally, voluntarily, and he was a preacher. He wanted to preach to the homeless, and he wanted to help the homeless, and that's basically what came out of that, and it was publicized. And one of the Rocky Mountain news reporter who now work for the is that Colorado Independent Media that covered and investigated this whole thing, and a lot of other cases that had to do with police brutality in Colorado and Denver and other places.
So it looks like we have a question in the front row, and Fatou, is it?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Fatou, and I was born in Mali, West Africa, born and raised in Mali, West Africa. And thank you, David. So about what are we all doing to help the planet? The first step, which is getting information. Thank you. I get a lot of my information from you. But what we need is also how do we as like indigenous person from Mali, and I'm speaking in the name of my community, how do we get our word out? We don't get the opportunity to let our problem be known. So we deal with the GMOs, just like in India where farmers have a lot of problems. So when they cannot get the genetically modified seed and stuff here in the United States, they go to the developing countries. They take the herbicide and the spray and all of the other things into the developing countries. So what we are doing now is try to really fight against the GMO in Mali and begin doing organic farming and organizing us as a woman to actually see if we can join hands with the movement that's going on here in the United States. So we need help in getting our word out.
So I think Carolyn would be the one to reach on that. Isn't there one of the task forces on Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice have to do with GMOs and chemicals and that sort of thing?
I can certainly connect you with people who are doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably people know that there's a labeling with the mic.
Yeah, okay. I'm coming with the mic, Carolyn. Something's on the ballot.
There's a thing on the ballot, which probably everybody here knows about, for labeling of GMOs in Colorado. And I think it's a really important thing because it really kind of brings to the surface the issue of GMOs. I think we would be the first in the country, if it passes, which it probably will, to have GMOs, require GMO labeling. So,
Vermont has passed it.
for labeling.
State of Vermont, yeah.
Okay. Have they been challenged in court? They are looking for, the GM No campaign is looking for people to help with getting out the vote. So, you know, if you are interested in that, you can go to their website and volunteer.
And what's the ballot number, do you know? 105. 105?
Yeah. I
Vote
just,
yes on 105?
yeah. I wanted to say just something quick since I've got this. First, David, thanks for the kind of the idea that, you know, you do it because it's right and you don't know really what's the consequences are going to be. And it actually does make you a stronger person. If you're afraid, you actually have to act to get through your fear. You can't sit at home waiting until you're not afraid to do something. And I wanted to say, last night I came home and I went to some of the film festival that the Rights of Nature was putting on last night. And I came home and my housemate and a friend were watching To Kill a Mockingbird. And, you know, really what that film showed was kind of the lynching, killing of black people in this country. And it really continues today in our justice system, where it seems as if the police can just act with impunity. I mean, we see that over and over and over again, and we probably all know that. But I was just really struck at how little has really changed and how it's actually legalized in the legal system now. And it was just something that really struck me last night. I mean, I know it's true, but it's one of those times. So thank you, David. It was really a great talk.
Well, the connections are manifest here. I've seen some people that have worked on these issues for a lifetime, and I've known a few like Arden for my lifetime. It's amazing that we're here today, still alive and working on these things. I see a gentleman looking for the mic.
Pardon me, because I came in late, was in the back and may have missed this, but so when there's elections, I would take it that you would advocate, insofar as doing the right thing with courage, that you would encourage voting for instance, Green Party as opposed to the leftist central, the Democratic ones likely to be elected, or not necessarily, depends case by case basis.
Well, I think one has to vote, you know, according to your conscience, not what someone tells you to do, but we have to vote strategically. And what will be the impact of a vote going to, say, a third or a fourth candidate? Since we're not in a parliamentary runoff situation, which I wish we had, because then we would have broader-based representation in the State House as well as in Washington with this winner-take-all system, you know, which plays right into the hands of the existing power structures. One has to be cautious with being, I think, overly virtuous, or I'm not going to give that person that vote, and, you know, perhaps, you know, leading to a very unfortunate consequence, particularly for vulnerable populations that are not as privileged as we are, who will bear the brunt of our virtuous behavior. So there's no clear answer, but I mean, look at the things that Gardner is advocating, and what the consequences might be if he's elected.
Well, that's what we're going to discuss on November 16th, right in this room, is the outcome of the election and what that might mean in policy. So I'm going over to this side of the room, and I think we got to take one more question after this, gentleman, because the committee's
My
waiting.
makeup is wearing off, which is
Yeah.
the real reason.
I have to say that in my professional life, I had the opportunity to do makeup on Ronald Reagan twice. And I had some horrific dreams those nights. I did a better job than you.
Thank you, David. In particular, I want to pick up a couple of things that you said. I'm going to try to bring in a little bit different approach. I'm going to say we're here in a church, which is interesting. How do we hold our courage? How do we recognize the patterns of what is going on? And you held up money, and money in a sense is a great symbol for egotism. Serving our own agendas. How can we develop common ground that we get people in conversation who hold opposing points of view? I want to put a few places in where I see attempts like that, one of which is in the Christian Science Monitor, and they have a section called Common Ground. People finding common ground, and the common ground really is we all have children. We all want life for our children to be healthy and safe and to continue. And yes, we are known on the left radical fringe for gloom and doom. It also paralyzes the soul and creates a kind of sclerosis. Now, I come from a Waldorf school. I come from the teachings of a man named Rudolf Steiner, and I stand for that kind of Michaelic courage, out of which we seek to recognize patterns that are bigger than what we see on the surface. There are forces at work that come from a lust for, many of us were hippies, and party on, bliss out, nirvana. There were the diggers who took the responsibility to make sure there were toilets, that there were medical facilities for the rest of the hippies who were stoned out of their gourd. Then there are those who want to control and fix everything in an utterly materialistic way. You spoke of clairvoyance. I think we can cultivate a form of seeing on a soul and spirit level, and hopefully that creates for us compassion, that we can reach out to other people who are in the grip of that, we got to fix it materialistically, or we have to just bliss out because it's too hard to be on this earth and confront these forces. How do we keep our courage? How do we turn the intelligence into wisdom motivated by love? Can we find the beauty in what needs to be done? Because it is beauty that turns our duty to be responsible into delight. And that is on a level of soul and spirit. And if we forget that in the struggle, we will lose. We will be gotten by the short hairs of fear and greed, even if just wishing to do the right, wishing the world to be a better place. How to translate that courageously into action, and you pointed that out. How do we connect with each other? Why are there not more people and younger people here? Most of us grew up in the 60s. We were on the street. Something still lacking. I'm pleading for, let's search for in our souls, how do we reach the young people in such a way? And it's not through sclerosis. It's not through gloom and doom. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I felt there was a need to say it. Thank you.
No. Very, very poetic.
Well, it's coming time to enjoy the refreshments that the committee's prepared for us. So hearing no other announcements, let's move over to the Sky Room and we'll continue this. David will have his books at a table and we'll continue this dialogue, okay? Thanks, everybody. See you in the Sky Room.